Hello, everyone. Welcome to Honesty, Sincerity, and Nature, Living Spontaneously in the Ninth House. So I was just chatting with Linda before starting this call, and there's some issue with, in some presentation, a teacher had like 100-year-old picture of a naked person, and then Facebook went ahead and blocked EA Zoom from sharing live on Facebook, and it's being resolved. But just hearing that story reminds me of how far we are as a society, as a culture, from just being in relationship to what is natural from the point of view of it being natural. It almost befuddles me sometimes when I think about, Marshall McLuhan. I've been studying him because he's a really very fascinating commentator when it comes to the nature of technology, but also understanding the nature of culture. And one thing he teaches is the technology of the time, and this doesn't just include technology, but it's also implicit to the cultural thermostat of the time, right? How we relate to information, how we relate to communication, how we orient towards the ways in which we learn and share and connect with each other. It's representing an invisible environment. Like, we're not aware of it until we update the environment to something else. We're not actually aware of the environment within which we live because it's all encompassing, right? In the sense that right now we have, this is more of a third house Gemini teaching, but you'll see where I'm going. We have our phones and the internet and all the mediums that we use to communicate and relate. And there's just something about that that's so all encompassing that we don't realize that we're constantly being shaped by our environment. Until the environment changes, we don't realize where we just were. We have retrospective awareness of it. And so I say this coming back to what is really about the ninth house, to point to the idea that we all are not aware of the extent to which we as a society and culture, ninth house corresponds to culture, spirituality, culture, race. It's sort of the mythos, the cosmology that you have of life. And if you're living in a culture that lives very close to nature, that culture is going to think of life in a way that also reflects how they live. And also there's a natural correlation between our geographical and physical relationship to the earth, where we're living, how we're relating to the earth, and how we will conceive of a greater understanding of reality. Compare that to someone living in a city, in an environment where there is a lot of activity, a lot of cars, a lot of business, a lot of production. This kind of environment is a particular kind of culture, right? And this culture, like all cultures, the worldview, how everyone thinks about reality, it's actually going to be very much reflected, mirrored in the way they are in relationship to the earth. So how we are in relationship to life, our perspective of it, is so fundamentally shaped by the ways in which we live, the environments in which we live, the forms of media that we use, the ways that we are communicating with each other, that we have a particular cosmological story, a painting of reality, a way of understanding life, and we're blind to it. We are all predominantly blind to it. The predominant mythology, mythos, cosmology, the story we have about life and creation, who we are, what's going on here. While we all have our own spiritual path and our own way of understanding reality and phenomenal reality, there's a significant degree to which we don't understand that it's just kind of strange that we're wearing clothes all the time. That it's just kind of strange that it's normal for a 100-year-old painting of a naked person to be flagged. And that there's just a certain normative relationship to nudity. And I speak about nudity because actually nudity is a ninth house thing. Not in any kind of sexual connotation whatsoever. it's what's natural. It's just completely what's natural. The best example of this is breastfeeding. How even today in most parts in the world, there's some sort of strange taboo around breasts, in particular the feeding of a baby. These are things that are natural. They're built into our biological existence. And we can just kind of, McLuhan said something interesting. It's that art in general is an anti-environment, meaning art is something that elicits self-awareness or self-reflection, and that it's counter to the overall context and environment within which we live. We're not aware of the environment because it surrounds us. The cultural thermostat, we can say, the overall way in which we are interacting and relating to life. But art is always going to bring a counter perspective, a way of thinking, a way of seeing that is not included in the mass consciousness of the overall environment. And so we don't realize that there is a mass conditioning, a belief structure around nature, around what is natural, because we're just so into it. And thus, we all form particular cosmological perspectives. We form a philosophy about reality. We'll, want to study different spiritual practices, spiritual things, and they're all incredibly valid and important, and we will go into this more. But very, very often, we're just totally not even aware of how disconnected we are from the most fundamental basic things. Another example of this is we have all these different diets, ways of improving our health, improving our diet, losing weight, feeling better, looking better. I had a realization recently when I was sort of sitting with the idea of making a commitment, a personal commitment practice in my own life. And I realized that the simplest thing, but the hardest thing for me to possibly commit to, would be to commit to get some good sleep. Sleep is a very natural thing. All species on this planet will sleep when they're tired. and they'll create a nesting, they'll create a home environment for themselves that allows for a certain level of nurturing and restfulness. And it just dawned on me with some level of humor and compassion and also grief, how hard it is, not just for myself, but for the human species in general, to just follow such natural rhythms. So we love to create complexity. And we love to look for an understanding of philosophy, a way of thinking that's really complex, right? That it might have nothing to do with our own direct experience. We miss out on what's so imminently within the realm of our own direct knowing because we're looking for something more. This connects to the ninth house notion of the grass is always greener, but on a very fundamental level, right? The grass is always greener. Where you are right now, the pastures upon which you stand, is where the path is. And this path is not a very complicated path. We want it to be complicated because this is a part of the conditioning within patriarchy. And you can say every house has its own, potential baggage. And this is a certain way in which we might relate to activity in every single house and every single archetype. When we look at how much we adore complexity, we see that the pastures upon which we stand right here, right now, are actually the seat of our own spirituality. It's the seat upon which we can know who we are in this moment by not looking for something beyond what's imminently clear and available. And I humbly speak this because I'm aware that as I speak about the idea of honesty and sincerity, it's something I value a lot. It's something I'm working on. And I'm often befuddled by how hard it is. Often just profoundly befuddled by how hard it is to actually be honest. Honest with oneself. Of course, it starts there. Honest with oneself. And it's easy to lie. And lying can take many forms. So lying can be pushing the body to be in a state of excitement and movement and seeking when it's actually needing rest, when it's just wanting quiet. It can be telling ourselves of a particular idea of the truth, an idea of the path, what we have to do, where we need to go to get somewhere, often because we had a realization of it prior to this moment and it felt really true then. We recently went to buy a mattress, and without going into all the details, we really felt the mattress was a yes. Then we had some other experiences, and there's a little bit of a journey in terms of coming to terms with how we truly felt about the mattress now. Because we have this security function in the Sagittarius 9th house archetype, which wants to feel secure in having a solid cosmological understanding. I know what's happening here. In the 9th house, we're on the pilgrimage, we're on the journey. And there's a quality in it where we need to be open to the experience. We need to be open to learning. We need to be open to what might arise on the journey so that we can be available to learn. We can be available for insight. We can be available for growth. And yet, simultaneous to that openness, there can be this insecurity relative to not actually knowing where we're going. And thus, one way that we can overcompensate from that security is by telling ourselves, this is how the path is supposed to look. This is what I'm supposed to do. It's like to continue driving in your car, just going and going and going. Yeah, I'm just going and following my intuition, but not actually stopping for a moment to see, do I really feel this right now? Because the path is so imminently in this moment that we have to check our ideas and our convictions about where it's going. This can feel very irritating, and one of the ways that we can protect ourselves with anything happening in the 9th house is through this mechanism of, I already know the answer. I already have it all figured out. But what's funny is you can have, someone who has it all figured out, and they can feel that sense of irritation. I know the truth of my religion. I know who I'm supposed to be. I know how this works. I have a very sound cosmology. I have a strong belief structure. And thus everything will be rationalized. Everything will be explained according to this very solid belief structure. And then you find yourself somewhere else in the world amongst people that know nothing about what you know. And they're not wearing clothing because they don't have a belief structure that orients around shame and repression and fear of nature. And you find yourself in that environment needing to uphold this belief structure where it's either necessary to completely convince other people so that one can feel secure, I'm no longer the only one with this belief, or to leave and separate oneself from this environment where what I know to be true is threatened. What really marks the unique nature of the 9th house is it really points to the fact that our spiritual path, our journey of expansion and realization, 9th house, comes via really acknowledging that each person's path comes through being authentic and honest with oneself. But if we feel like an outsider, if we feel like we don't belong, if we feel alienated, there's a degree to which we can't fully be honest with ourselves, right? Because it's like the story we tell ourselves, I'm alienated, I'm an outsider, I don't belong here, I need to be in a different place, a different practice, a different place, a different pasture. There's another way of living that is more aligned with me. It can breed this psychology where we think we're being honest, but we're actually not. Because in the 9th house, we're learning the principles of nature. We're learning to live those principles of nature. And so the principles of nature are always operative in the forest and in this room that I'm sitting in right now. There's no place where the principles of the Tao, the inherent natural laws of life, aren't operative. And so when we start to seek something else, even if it's in favor of wanting to be more natural, more authentic, it's very easy to be dishonest with ourselves because we're we're missing out on the moment. We're missing out on right here, right now. So the work within the ninth house is this journey of being on the pilgrimage and seeing life as this journey of expansion and growth. But it's not about some sort of idea of going out there. Actually, oftentimes going out there is a big, big part of it, because there is expansion into new experiences and there's a spontaneity to it, which we'll delve into in a moment. But it doesn't start by going out there, it starts by being here. All good experiences happen here. I was with my daughter a few days ago. She's only been walking for like 4 months or something. And so in those 4 months, we actually haven't spent a lot of time, like just me and her outside, maybe just a handful of times. And so I was with her and I was really appreciating how in this wide open, she thrives in wide open spaces. It feels qualitatively very different than when we're in the home. Because in the home, there's a lot of things you can pull off the shelves. It's more messy. I feel a lot of boundaries in the home. But to be out in nature, where there are the elements, and there are all these new terrains to explore. In fact, the terrain, in a sense, is always changing. And depending on where you are, you might always find yourself in a new place. There is something incredibly freeing and joyful in just being with her in this environment, tracking her, being with her, holding this protective energy so that nothing, dangerous happened. But just watching how her movement was very spontaneous, right? She felt to go here, she went there. She saw this, she went towards this. Everything was just arising in the moment. And it was all this discovery. And you can feel when there are sort of these insights happening, these realizations that are happening. We had this one experience where we were playing with a ball, and the ball rolled underneath the car. And there was like this really neat discovery of the ball suddenly not being in view. And now it's underneath the car. And she bent down to look to see the ball that she was able to deduce would now be underneath the car. I mean, all of that is just an expansion of life experience. It's all so profound, so beautiful. And being in that space of presence with her, I found this is what it's like to live freely. This is what it's like to live freely in the ninth house. This is the spiritual journey right here. This is the pilgrimage. You're on this journey and you don't have a very strong and a very fixed idea of where it's supposed to go and what it's supposed to look like. And so spontaneity is so essential. It's a key characteristic in the ninth house. Because spontaneous means it's unplanned. And unplanned means there's no concept, it's uncontrived. We're not deciding ahead of time. And truth is spontaneous. Realization is spontaneous. The way to know that is if you've ever laughed at a joke. When you hear a joke, the humor, the experience of laughter is spontaneous. The insight arises spontaneously. There's no such thing as a planned joke, right? Planned humor, a planned insight. You can't force an insight. It's actually hilarious to even think about trying. I actually want to make up some sort of dialogue where we try to do that just for the heck of it, because it sounds so funny. It sounds so interesting to actually consider the idea that insight can in some way be planned. In the same way as a teacher, ninth house, you actually can't plan to say something profound. All you can do is be authentic. And that's like the hit or miss quality of the ninth house. There can be the sense of sharing something, sharing ideas. And it's very easy for the mind to stray into a state of mind where we are replaying teachings or concepts or things that we've known already, things that we've already figured out in the past, and just repeating it. So it feels like we're saying something smart or saying something spiritual. But in essence, in actuality, there's a dishonesty in it. And getting into the understanding of dishonesty, again, is a very subtle thing. Truth is so layered. Truth has so many dimensions to it. The energy of truth is a present moment thing. So something can look honest, but it's actually dishonest. So let's take a step back here and look at a note here. Oh yeah. All I have on this notepad is the word mood painting, and I already addressed that. There's another note that I have on this book. In the ninth house, we have an association with nature, and I spoke about speaking how we have all these belief constructs that are just so almost afraid of nature. But really starting with the idea of nature allows us to drop in again to this profound simplicity about life. Nature is totally sincere. Nature is authentic. Nature doesn't lie. And when I say nature, it doesn't lie, take anything in nature, a tree, an animal, a baby, basically any aspect of nature. You can even say human beings don't lie. We can try to lie, but we can't, meaning we can't ever make something that isn't to be. So we can convince ourselves to be something that we're not. But what's interesting about nature is that it still is what it is, which actually is fascinating, because true lying always means there is some sort of distortion, and a creation of an appearance, a creation of reality, a formation of a reality that's happening on top of reality. Right? There's a formation of some sort of belief or construct or way of thinking, but it's all happening on top of what's actually true. And so we learn from nature by just listening to it, being connected to it. The faculty of the intuition in the ninth house is a state of opening our consciousness to be in a state of receptivity and openness. And that happens, I find, whenever we're not holding too strong of an idea, too strong of a fixed position about what things are and where we're supposed to go and what it's supposed to look like. There's a story that I once heard about this man that was traveling in the jungle to meet this tribe, where he was going to do some medicine work with this tribe. He was searching and searching and searching. And he said to his friend in one moment when they're swimming in the water, he said, you know what? If the whole travel was just to get here now, I would be content. That would be enough. And in that moment, the leader of this tribe showed up and took this man to their people. Whenever we let go of the grasping, of the trying to make meaning, one of the issues with the ninth house, and we'll look at some examples to really flesh this out. One of the issues with the ninth house is you're with the tree and you're philosophizing it. You're looking for the meaning of it, trying to find some sort of higher understanding of it. And it's just what it is, right? It just is what it is. And to actually learn about it, to connect with it, is to have an honest experience of it. And again, you can't force yourself to have an experience of it. Nothing could possibly be forced. So when we're spontaneous, we're open to the energy of the moment, and thus we can have this really deep sense of freedom where there's no difference between being in one place for a while or being out in the forest, or not traveling for a while or traveling all over the place. Qualitatively, there's no difference in terms of the level of realization that can be achieved. Because wherever we're going, the possibility of restlessness is there. The possibility of not integrating our experiences in a way that actually provides some level of insight and understanding. It's always possible to be opportunistic, to be looking for more and more and more and more, to be thinking, the nature of intuitive thought often can express in a way where we're just trying to find some sort of conclusion. We're trying to, grasp the greater meaning of things. And if we're so identified with that, we won't really allow ourselves to learn. So there's a need in the ninth house to have a lot of freedom, a lot of space and a lot of freedom. And that space and that freedom isn't contextual, right? It's not about a particular environment. The space and the freedom actually is in the mind. And if it's in the mind, then the soul will find that they're living a life where they're not trying to make themselves something that they're not. They're not trying to fit into some sort of spiritual or religious context that isn't true for them. And this creates a very interesting position for all souls. We want to grow, we want to learn. We know there's more to realize. And yet we also need to be completely authentic about our own journey. We need to be true to ourselves. And so it's very tempting to be seeking some sort of direction. And you know that teaching, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. But to become so teacher focused that we forget that there's a unity between the outer and the inner. That the deeper teaching in the ninth house is self-honesty. And we can actually be dishonest with ourselves in a perpetual state of seeking, in a perpetual state of wanting to find something better, wanting to find something more. So we can put Pisces in the ninth house. In Pisces, the ninth house, there can be an underlying insecurity relative to feeling that one can't actually know the truth. There are all these different paths, all these different ways, all these different philosophies, all these different, spiritual practices. Different teachers will say different things. One teacher will say, this is how you should eat. The other teacher would say, no, just focus on forgiveness. And all of this can get stuck in the mind, where there's no longer an intuitive sense of one's path. Because we should never have to seek our path. That's the paradox. The path is our path. It's here right now. Teachers will come, guidance will come. Perhaps traditions and lineages will arise and show up for us on our path. But it should never be a feeling that we're seeking. The pilgrimage, the fact of our life, is the fact of it. So we're on this journey, and who knows what will arise next? Who knows who we'll meet? Who knows what kind of conversations we'll have? Who knows what kind of insight we might have to share with other people? The moment we decide to say, the journey's right here, so Pisces in the ninth house, the journey is right here, the teacher is right here, and also I can be an instrument. I can be a teacher for others. I can share insight and knowledge in a way that benefits other souls on their own soul journey. Whenever we orient to that way of thinking, that way of being, all the wisdom, all the insight shows up. It's what every teacher shares with us. It's what all teachings are essentially pointing to. And it's sort of the paradox of spiritual practice. Adyashanti was once explaining that when we do spiritual practice and we're so insistent on the idea of the practice and what it is, we don't realize that we're going into the practice with an answer already. And again, you can't have an insight that way. You can't laugh at the joke if you've kind of already told yourself you know the punchline. It ceases to be funny. So there's a need to come into experience, but at the same time be very inquisitive, be very open, right, to the present moment experience, so that what's arising is imminent, it's clear. Jeffrey Wolf Green has often spoken relative to the Sagittarius ninth house archetype that knowledge never needs to be proven or explained. It's irrefutable. Because when you know something, you don't need any beliefs. Right? And that's the difference between knowledge and beliefs. Beliefs don't stand on their own. Beliefs, you have to believe in it. You don't need to believe in knowledge, because what you know, you know. And thus, what you know is sort of just natural. It's self-evident. It stands on its own. And then you realize, oh, I didn't even realize this, but I know. There's a level of knowing in here. There's a level of insight into the nature of reality. And there will be no need to speak about it unless you're doing what I'm doing. And apparently this is a part of your karma to teach and share. Then you have a personal path where you're taking the position of sharing knowledge, sharing insight, and that's a part of your work. It's a part of your dharma. It's also a part of your healing. But in essence, right, and this is a part of my own learning with a very Sagittarian ninth house kind of chart, true knowledge means there's really no authentic impulse to go and tell people about it, because it's just experience. There's nothing flashy about it at all. And this is a really important thing to understand. And we can start backwards by looking at it. In a state of realization, there's nothing big to talk about here, right? If we're playing the role of teacher, then we're going to do that. But, day to day, you're just hanging out, buying food with your family, taking a walk. You won't need to be telling people or teaching people. It's not going to be a part of your identity structure. Why would it be? It's like being naked. It's just natural. It feels like a big deal only because of how removed we are from what's natural. But when something is known, it just is. I remember when I began eating with my hands. I actually don't remember when I began, because I don't know when I began, but I remember in the earlier days, in my probably late teens / early 20s, when I just started using my hands, it felt natural, meaning I don't know what I saw or what elicited it, but I think it's an old memory of mine of just probably how I've lived for lifetimes. I just found it natural, more enjoyable, just simpler for me. There's never a lot of thought into it. And I remember I would only become self-conscious of it when I was around other people that weren't, or people would ask me questions. Oh, why are you eating with your hand? I'm like, oh, I forgot that I was. It's just such a natural, immediate instinct that it's just what I do. And that's what it's like, I find, to be in a place of knowledge. And this knowledge isn't like some sort of absolute moralistic, I am right, I have the answers. It's knowledge. There's a sense of authenticity with it, and it just stands completely on its own. I find this to be so beautifully with the evolutionary astrology lineage. So many of the teachings that have been brought forth from Jeff Green on my own soul journey, there are always these thresholds where a deeper dimension is integrated, a deeper insight is realized. And even just going deeper and deeper into the archetypes. I was just recently teaching on Mercury for the course that I'm teaching. And I had the best time just meditating on Mercury. And where I feel I can stand in authority as a teacher is where I come upon a sense of knowledge, clear seeing. It's experiential. And when I land upon experiential knowledge, there's so much joy and peace in it. There's a gift in it. It's like, that ninth house security mechanism where everything makes sense. It all fits. Because we know there's meaning behind everything. We look into life and we ask in the ninth house, what's the meaning of all of this? What's it pointing to? What does it say about who I am? What does it say about what life is? And to have an insight is just really beautiful in the ninth house, because it actually points us, to me, it really points us as something that is unifying and forgiving and holy. That there is reality, there is truth. In the ninth house, we were never going to arrive at the full truth. We're never going to arrive at like a total direct knowledge. Because in a sense, the truth isn't even something that can be known. Like, truth is Pisces, 12th house. It just is. We surrender to it. We defer the principle of truth to teach us and guide us and show us. It's beyond what's knowable, even. It's beyond the threshold of knowing. And in the evolutionary journey of the soul, that Piscean 12th house journey is about surrendering. Thus we can know our unity with God, but we still let go of our own personal thinking. We let go of our own subjective ideas and beliefs. Whereas in the ninth house, there's the ongoing expansion of understanding. There's the ongoing process of expanding our knowledge, our insight into reality. And this happens in very natural association with how the Pisces 12th house archetype works as well. And that Virgo square to the ninth house, sixth house Virgo, emphasizes the need for discernment, because we can be certain of ourselves. We do it all the time, and we see that masses of people all around the world for many, many, many hundreds of years have been doing it all the time. Certainty. And yet that certainty ends up being a mask that covers uncertainty, a weakness in one's understanding. And whenever there's a weakness in our insight, we'll need to uphold it, because we'll be threatened by anything that takes it down. So let's look at another example. Let's look at Aries in the ninth house. Aries in the ninth house now is needing a lot of freedom and independence to find the truth and find its way on its own terms. So there's a need to feel secure relative to, I have all the answers within myself. I'm going to look inside. And that solo archetype, that solo journey can be deeply emphasized here. The challenge is the soul can be completely blind to its own subjectivity, realizing that its way, its own realizations, its own insight, it hasn't been checked. It hasn't been matched by other people's perspectives. It has not perhaps yet opened up to other ways of thinking, to the possibility of having such a strong-willed conviction as to one's knowing of the truth. And the possibility of not listening, the possibility of becoming so narrow-focused that without realizing it, the soul is once again living in a belief structure. Wherever we have the ninth house, any planets or signs, activity happening in the ninth house, points us to one, where we need a lot of space and freedom to walk our path, to know ourselves. Two, where there's a need to access experience in a way that's spontaneous, in a way that's unplanned. And thus the mind has to be open, the mind has to be fluid and free. And three, it's where we come across the possibility of direct knowledge, direct insight into the nature of phenomenal reality. Clear, full comprehension and insight and intuition. So I'm going to take a moment and ground and see where we want to take this next. You know, Taurus in the ninth house can feel inadequacy relative to not knowing. You know, you think of the ninth house as you're on a journey into places you've never been before. And there needs to be some level of humility so that we acknowledge that we're always still learning. And you really can't take someone somewhere that you've never been. And thus there can be an insecurity relative to not feeling very philosophically or, spiritually equipped. I have Chiron in Taurus in the ninth house, and I catch this all the time. It's torturous. As a teacher, as someone that is teaching a lot, sometimes I find myself in that Chiron ninth house psychology of immense self-doubt, immense self-criticism. But here, to slow down Taurus, to stop running, to stop moving. And it's coming back to what's the journey right now? What's alive? What's awake right now on the path? So let me see if there are any questions. I don't think we're on Facebook Live, but maybe from those that are here. If you have any questions on any of the ninth house teachings that I've been speaking to, or any generic examples, I don't want to look at live actual people's charts here. And I'm just going to tune in to see if there's, to where I can go with this.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The current relaxed. with the Sagittarius on the south. I'm just thinking of that right now because of the correlation to the ninth house.
What was the question?
The correlation to the ninth house and the south node in Sagittarius right now.
They wouldn't be correlated unless the south node was in the ninth house. I mean, so the south node and Sag, of course, archetypally is connected.
Right.
We can talk about, so it's like south node in the ninth house, for example. Is that what you're asking about? Similarities? Yeah. Okay, sure. So south node in the ninth house, regardless of what sign it's conditioned by, means that the soul has come to know itself and has built an egocentric structure of self, how it's come to integrate its experiences through the need to either on the one hand seek and have freedom to find answers, to seek and search for greater meaning and understanding. There can be thus lifetimes that orient around wandering, moving around, traveling, or they could have been a teacher, and thus the ego structure is built around, I have all the answers, I know it all. And thus they'll have an identification with knowing, with being able to explain themselves and to prove themselves. It can be a teacher identity. So two shadow pieces here of the ninth house can be the teacher identity or the constant seeker identity. And both can embody a quality of restlessness, where neither are really being on the journey right here, right now. It can also simply represent where there are all these insights. There's a significant level of depth and insight and understanding that the soul has already achieved prior to this lifetime. So they come into this world with a lot of wisdom. Often you can see it in their eyes. If they've traveled far and wide, there's like a certain depth of experience and knowledge and understanding. And the core teaching of the ninth house is, again, direct experience. We want to be available for direct experience. So these souls can be teachers, but the trick here, being that it's a south node, it's to not get stuck in any kind of dogmatism or fixed way of thinking that might accidentally direct people away from their own direct experience. I've had way too many teachers show up in my life and other people's lives that have been too quick to offer specific suggestions. Now, I really honor and appreciate that there are actual old lineages and techniques and spiritual practices that have been passed down from generation to generation, and there's clearly a place for them and working with them. And at the same time, there can be, I feel, a false emphasis that's placed upon what the path is supposed to look like that actually ends up slowing down the whole journey. It adds a lot of time. Because I feel in putting such an emphasis on a particular version of what the path looks like, it means we're coming in with a lot of answers. There's an art to teaching, there's an art with guiding people on their spiritual journey, where there's a lot of spaciousness that people can still find their own way and come to terms with their own self, be honest with their own self. And suggestions or advice or guidance can be offered, but only relative to what the soul's already awakening and kind of finding within. And answers and practices and directions need to be offered with a lot of discernment. And this can be a karmic issue for a soul with the south node in the ninth house, or maybe they've given a lot of advice, but maybe they don't even believe that advice, right? Have they really integrated it within themselves? Is it a really good sounding answer? But have they tasted it? Do they really know it to be so? So in this case, the third house would just really represent this ongoing journey for the soul to be open to different perspectives, different views. And the factual basis of the third house is very important for the ninth house, because similar to the square root of Virgo, we have to ask, is it working? Am I getting anywhere? I'm driving in this car and I'm following a particular belief construct, and I have to ask the question, is this actually taking me anywhere? What are the fruits of this way of thinking? What are the fruits of this practice? And so there should be a certain linear obviousness to this inquiry. Is it working? How do I feel when I do this? The energy of honesty and sincerity, just coming back to that, is so essential to the ninth house, and I will speak for a few minutes on this. It's foundational because, again, nature is honest and sincere. And apparently it's just really difficult in the ninth house relative to our own conditioning. And if we have a certain kind of karma, this can be very difficult to really be honest, to really be sincere, because it means facing that we just are where we are right now. It simply means that. It means facing that it's not as glamorous as we thought it would be. It's not as exciting, or we don't know as much as we thought we would know. And paradoxically, that's where all the wisdom and the knowledge comes through. Coming back to this moment, practicing the teachings. There's a slowing down that I find happens of where I want to be, or where I thought I should be, or where I wanted to think of myself as being. I was talking to my father earlier about all the teaching that I'm doing for the course, and it's a lot of editing. And the question came up, why is there so much editing? And I said, because I don't want to say anything that I don't believe in. Right? I only want to speak words that I feel are honest. I don't want to teach things that actually don't feel true or don't feel authentic, or to speak in a way where I'm saying things that actually I'm not living. I want to feel that there's a sincerity in it, and that I'm talking from an authentic, lived place. And then he very wisely said, then don't do that. Like don't say things you don't believe in. Don't lie. I'm like, that sounds very simple. And yet the Sagittarian ninth house security mechanism, which very, very often eludes me, is to know. And so there's an ego structure, and this can be very strong with the South Node in Sag or in the ninth house, where there's an ego structure built around already knowing, and thus needing to see oneself as knowing. And so it's very easy to lift up into a somewhat of a disconnected place. Where it then becomes concepts and prescripted ideas and teachings. So I find that slowing down brings me into just a felt moment, lived experience, a big part of my own personal practice throughout the day, but also just in terms of sitting quietly, is on one level just first kind of establishing this preliminary meeting myself where I am. Meeting myself where I am, and it takes some time. It's almost like all the movement, all the restlessness, all the seeking. If there's one gem that I would really take from this talk, that I feel I can take, that it's really a feeling awake for me, is what is it like to not be moving? Like, what is it like to not be so restless? To be trying to go somewhere, to be trying to find something. And I guess that's a good example of, Chiron and Taurus in the ninth house. To be where you are, and there's that inconjunct between Taurus and Sagittarius, and that reflects that notion of Sagittarius as expansion, its growth, and Taurus is right here, right now, contentment. And thus there's a sense of it not moving further out, to be with the sensory experience, the felt sense of this moment, to let that orient, to let that lead the way. So let me just see if there's any other important pieces that want to be spoken to in this ninth house talk. You've heard about that whole shooting the arrow thing, and it might hit the target, it might not hit the target. You can experience that in the ninth house, where you might say something and it might land, it might not land. This all comes from a place where we're living in a more externalized state of being, when we're not trying to hit the target, but we're just living in the target. We're just living authentically and sincerely. Question: in regard to the false emphasis on philosophies, worldviews, and religions, why did the evolution of man go into these distorted directions, only having to give many of them up? And in terms of man's evolution, when and how will we wake up to what is true and natural? I don't know why we as a human species went into these distorted directions. And when will we wake up to what is true and natural? So here's what I can speak to, and this is kind of the answer, but it's also not the answer. We can really only speak for ourselves, and we can't even go back very far in history. The nature of the practice is actually bringing ourselves to the present moment and say, okay, why am I choosing to orient my entire life around something that I'm believing? Right? We can get honest with ourselves right now about that by asking ourselves, is this true? Is this true? We can be completely quiet and silent in ourselves and just be dutifully reciting a mantra. And we can ask ourselves, is this true? Not like, is it the right path for me? Because that's an answer. It's so concrete, right? What's true is more subtle. Am I here now? Am I here now in this practice? And it doesn't mean you should stop it or not stop it, but it's like to really get first honest with ourselves. That's very accessible. That's very tangible. And in terms of when we will wake up to what's true and natural, I just look at myself and I think, okay, what's true and what's natural is everywhere. And I can always be myself. And if I know that I am myself, life will feel very freeing. Life will feel very open, very fluid, very freeing. I will feel that spontaneous insight. I will feel that expansion, that growth that happens when I'm not trying to force a particular way of thinking, force a direction. And my understanding in general, in terms of how we have come to fear nature, it's a part of patriarchal conditioning that I think just has its roots in something very, very ancient, and it's like a core, simple, very innocent mistake that was initially made. And this mistake has something to do with the advent of shame, the advent of believing that in some way the source of all things could regard us in any way other than holy and whole and pure in love. Because once we start seeing ourselves in any way at all as separate or unworthy, we begin to look at nature. We begin to look at life in a way where we are seeing what is wholly natural and pure as it is created, and projecting our own internal sense of separation onto what is natural. So that's just my own thought on that. And that's why the return to the simplest thing, which is the body, being naked, things that are just so natural. Every species out there, things that are as simple as that, carry so much controversy, so much shame, so much confusion. One more question: is it natural to have a philosophy of life? What place does philosophy have in my life? I think philosophies are natural, and it's a security function, meaning we all have a need to understand our place within the cosmos. So the ninth house corresponds to, thanks for that question, because that helps me shape the pedagogy. Ninth house corresponds to how we all shape our cosmological understanding of reality. And no one's free of that. Right? No one doesn't have a philosophy. Even if they say, I don't have a philosophy, there's a philosophy in that. You ask someone to talk about the meaning of life, what they think about it, they cannot avoid conveying some sort of cosmological understanding. There's a natural orientation within all souls to come to some sort of intuitive cosmological insight on reality. And so it's not just that we need it, it's that we all do it. It's inherent. And thus, the journey relative to the ninth house isn't, do I have a philosophy? Do I not have a philosophy? It's looking at the nature of our thoughts about reality and becoming honest about where we are trying to contrive something versus what is self-evident. Because we're all different, our paths are wired in completely different ways. We are going to come to our insights and our understanding in completely different ways. Very, very different. And so it doesn't have to conform or look like the way other people, and that's why that alienation piece, right? It's like the spiritual path doesn't necessarily mean you have to be naked or eat with your hands or whatever. You can be living a very authentic spiritual life and, be very civilized and cordial. And there's no one way, because the Tao is the Tao. It doesn't actually say you have to look and act a certain way. But when we become so oriented towards a particular way of thinking, either we'll try to make other people convert to that or we'll feel alienated. And all these things are like, what do I believe? I mean, it's just amazing. Different karmic dynamics within the ninth house, Pisces there, Neptune there, even Mercury there can reflect these kinds of issues, or anything that's aspecting sixth house planets as well, because all these archetypes in some way can correspond to either confusion relative to there being so many different points of views and perspectives and ideologies, or these puritanical notions of spirituality, right? That just have us thinking in particular ways, because this is where salvation will be. This is how we will heal. This is how we will wake up. This is the right way to think. So having a way of thinking and integrating reality is natural. What isn't natural is where we contrive it to fit and to conform into particular forced ways of thinking, and thus we're no longer honest. What's natural is what's honest. And we can find deeper insight into reality by just being deeply honest with ourselves. Yeah. Okay, so that feels like a good place to close. Hopefully there's some usefulness in this, and if anyone has any more questions, you're welcome to ask. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Ari.
Bye.